Well, welcome to the mid-Norfolk garden, and these are my lemon trees, my 4 potted lemons that have been outside since I think early May. We brought these out. We looked at the forecast this season and thought we're going to get away with this, and I brought them out quite early on in the season, and they've been growing away in this position very, very nicely in full sun since. They've put some good growth on. We haven't had too much in the way of pests and diseases this year. A little bit of scale insect that we've kept on top of. We've had a little bit of black fly on a couple of the plants, and the only other problem we've had with these being outside in this position is ants forming nests in the actual pots, which we had to deal with, and that can be a little problem. It's worthwhile when you're not growing them inside or in trays, just keeping an eye on what's going on in the actual compost, because if the ants form big nests in there, they will remove a big volume of the compost and expose the roots to damage, and you'll get a lot of dieback and damage on these lemons. So that was just something we did notice and took measures to control earlier in the season. I've got a good crop of lemons coming on, starting to ripen, particularly on this central of the larger trees, still showing some blossom, but overall you'll notice that the foliage is really quite yellow, and that's a sign that this plant is struggling for nutrients, and can also be a sign that it's starting to notice the decreasing amount of daylight and nighttime temperature drops that we're getting here. So by September, as we are now, you need to be regularly still watering and feeding these plants, checking the growth on them to make sure that it's green and lush and that the flowers aren't dropping. The ideal should be for them still to be setting some fruit, as you can see in this position here. These little embryonic lemons, they'll not all stay on there, but they've been fertilised, and that's the beauty of having the lemon trees outside over the summer, that they do naturally get fertilised without any intervention from you. As long as you're watering these trees regularly and keeping them in good growth, then you should get natural pollination and a good crop of early smaller lemons growing on throughout this season. And here's an example of that from a fruit that was pollinated and set earlier on in the spring, now growing away, and that will grow over this winter, and by next year should be looking like this. And this one's going to ripen as this tree comes into the conservatory sometime between December and probably next May. We'll be cutting that and using the lemon. Same with the other crop of lemons on this tree. Let's go and have a look at some of the others. Oh, here's one of the other lemon trees. See the growth on this, much greener, much lusher, much more healthy looking, less stressed plant in general. This is the one we had the problems with the ants nesting in the compost, and the way we just could see that was an issue was just by tipping the pot, and the compost was being removed out the bottom by the ants. The other good clue, it's worth watching this, a little tip, just watching the stem and looking for black ants or red ants making their way up and down the plant. That's usually a sign that you've got either scale insects or some black fly or green fly on the plant, because that's what they're doing. They're going and milking those little bugs, and if you see a black ant moving along a leaf, it's worthwhile just lifting up and having a good look along that stem. They are a good sign or an indicator of an active scale insect or other problem. So follow the ants and remove any problems that you find. We are going to continue to water these plants, leaving them outside for as long as we possibly can while monitoring the nighttime temperatures. And if you're keeping citrus plants in pots in the UK, then you need a good and reliable weather app on your phone that you can check. And if you're seeing that the frost or air temperature is likely to occur, they will take a little bit for a couple of days, but at that stage you really need to be bringing these into a conservatory for some protection. And I've just spotted a little example of a scale insect on here to show you. Very good example by this time of year. Let me see if I can get that into focus. There you go. They've got good tans. They've turned this dark brown colour, flat, adherent to the leaf, and with this you just need to get your thumb and squish him. I'm sorry, but that's the only way to get rid of these. There are some biological controls that you can get, but you need to be doing that continuously. And really, if you're just keeping 1 or 2 lemon trees, then you need to get into the habit of just picking over them regularly and removing the scale insects as you see them. And that way you'll keep the growth healthy, the lemon crop protected, and all the nutrients and goodness that the lemon trees are producing going into the fruit, which is all about really. Got a good crop of lemons on this tree again. Little one here, another little one forming there. And again, these are ripe now, ready for use. Don't want to leave them too long. Once you see them with a good colour on them, that's the time to be helping yourself on a regular basis to your lemons and allowing the trees to put the goodness into the remaining fruit. You'll see there's still a good deal of bud on this, and it's quite common when you bring these into the conservatory or into the house, wherever you're keeping these over winter, for it to have a big flush, a flowering flush. And while it does that, you need to keep the compost moist and the plant in growth. You don't want to allow it to dry out at all. Only as it starts to really restrict its amount of activity and growth later in the season, and it will do that naturally as the light levels decrease and the daylight hours shorten. Then you start drying these plants off and just keeping the compost on the very dry but slightly moist side, but you don't want to overwater them. You certainly don't want to waterlog them. So as the plant decreases its growth, you decrease the frequency of watering, and then we usually stop feeding these for the period between around December and the following March, and then we'll start feeding and watering again as the daylight increases and the temperature and growth starts back on these plants. And they'll tell you when they're ready to do that. Just keep an eye on them, keep an eye on the leaf turber, and make sure that it's got sufficient water just to keep the plant ticking over winter. And that's the way to secure the plant in good health, ready for next season.